Today we're going to look at the actual rhythm of poetry. So some of the terms that we'll be looking at with our scansion would be syllable, the poetic feet, and of course, the meter. So let's start off with the word syllables. Now, English words have clear syllables. We usually divide words into syllables easily. We can also determine which syllables to emphasize or to stress in each word. For example, usually when we would say in English the word angel, we would stress the first of the two syllables. We would say angel, not angel. So the word complete, we would stress the second syllable, however. We usually would say the word complete, not complete. So let's take a look at a few words just to make sure we understand what stressed and unstressed are. And sometimes it will be at the very beginning, sometimes it'll be at the end. Sometimes when you have more than two syllables, it could even be the stressed syllable in the middle. For example, our word poem, we have a tendency to stress at the beginning of the word. So you can see we've got the first part being stressed and the second part of the word being unstressed. The word poetry, we have the stressed syllable at the very beginning, and then we have unstressed syllables, the and the tree. Sometimes we put these stressed at the end, like the word relief. We also have the word recommend, where we have the stressed syllable at the end. And sometimes we put stressed syllables in the middle, discomfort, entertainment. The next word that we'll look at, looking at the different types of the forms of poetry, would be scansion. Now, scansion, or the act of scanning, is analyzing poetry in terms of its rhythmic components, the sounds that you hear. Now, the graphic representation indicated by marked accents and feet of the rhythm of a line or the lines in the verse. So you may have seen scansion marks like the following if you look at the bottom of the page, where we see stressed and unstressed syllables. Now, the curved lines in this case are the unstressed syllables, while the straight slashes above the words are stressed syllables. So again, the curved shows the unstressed, and the straight slashes are the stressed syllables, the syllables that get more pronunciation. The next term that we'll look at is what a poetic meter is. Now, meters are the rhythms within the poems. Usually, meters are the arrangement of the stressed and the unstressed syllables that occur at equal intervals. Now, metered verse has prescribed rules as to the number and to the placement of syllables used per line. So just like if you imagine if you are measuring feet or inches, if you are measuring meters, kilometers, it's a type of measurement. In poetry, a poetic meter is also a type of measurement, but this time we're measuring syllables in equal intervals. A poetic foot, it's a repeated sequence of rhythm that's comprised of two or more stressed and or unstressed syllables. Usually when you look at feet, they will actually be separated by slashes in between the different meters. And there are 5 main patterns to poetic feet. They are called iambic, trochaic, anapestic, dactylic, and spondaic. So let's take a look more closely at these 5 different parts of feet. The first one is known as the iambic pattern. That has one unstressed syllable followed by one stressed syllable. For example, we have the word repose, belief, and complete, where our stressed syllable comes at the end. One unstressed syllable followed by one stressed syllable equals iambic pattern. The trochaic pattern is the opposite. Your stressed syllable comes first. So you have one stressed syllable followed by one unstressed syllable. For example, garland, speaking, value. The stressed syllable and then the unstressed syllable is trochaic. The next one that we have is anapestic. Anapestic has 2 unstressed syllables, and then the stressed syllable is at the end. So if you think of a soft, soft, and then a hard stressed syllable. For example, on the road, interrupt, unabridged, contradict, engineer, masquerade, Galilee. Now, notice we have, for a lot of these, we have one word. But our first example, on the road, that could be considered anapestic. I still have two unstressed syllables that are followed by a stressed syllable. So you could use short, simple words. You could use a multisyllabic word. But at any rate, you have two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable to create anapaestics. The next one is known as dactylic. Now, dactylic is the opposite of anapestic. You have one stressed syllable, and then it's followed by two unstressed syllables. Happiness, galloping, fortunate, Saturday, daffodil, murmuring, rhapsody. So your one stressed syllable comes first, and there is two unstressed syllables afterwards that make the dactylic pattern. The last one is known as the spondaic pattern. So now instead of looking at what is stressed and unstressed, all syllables have equal stresses on them. For example, heartbreak, out, penknife, ad hoc, heartburn. You'll notice with the words that I've chosen here that either I'm repeating the same words or the same syllables like out, or you have combined words. You've got words with multiple that you could break apart for multiple meanings, like the words heartbreak, heartburn, penknife. These words could be broken down into simpler patterns, but therefore their syllables are probably all equally stressed or all equally unstressed. There's no stressed and unstressed syllable in spondaic pattern. All syllables have equal stress. So let's take a look more closely at these 5 different feet. So the iamb, the one unstressed plus one stressed syllable, is the most common poetic foot in English verse. Most people have a tendency to want to start off with no stress and then move into the stress. And because it's one versus one, that's usually the most common one you'll find in English verse. So once again, as you look at examples of an iambic foot, you have that unstressed syllable versus stressed syllable. Behold, destroy, the sun, and watch. Again, you can see we have one unstressed syllable versus one stressed syllable. It could be one word. It could be a phrase like the sun and watch. So let's take a look at some examples, and I've picked specifically English verse, such as, say, Shakespeare's sonnets and a poem with Christopher Marlowe. Behold and watch the sun destroy and grow. So we can see we have an unstressed syllable at the very beginning of each of the feet. Now remember, the feet are being separated by these forward slashes. And then you're going to have, after the unstressed syllable, a stressed syllable. It could be one word, it could be a phrase. Behold, unstressed syllable, stressed syllable, iambic foot. The next one, and watch, unstressed syllable, stressed syllable, iambic foot. Another example from Shakespeare is, when I do count the clock that tells the time. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Now notice in the third one, he actually breaks apart the word summer. He wanted to use the word summer, but summer has the stressed syllable first. So he made sure that we were breaking the foot apart at the proper area between the fourth and the fifth iambic foot. We also have other writers that will use iambic feet, such as Christopher Marlowe. Come live with me and be my love. Moving on to the trochaic poem. This time the stressed syllable comes first, and then it is followed by an unstressed one. We can see this, for example, in the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and his famous poem, The Song of Hiawatha. If you look, you have the stressed syllable first, followed by the unstressed syllable. And I've gone ahead and I've put in some iambic feet in the first 4 lines, just again give you that sense of the iambic feet being separated. This is trochaic. By the shores of Gitche Gumee, by the shining big sea water, stood the wigwam of Nokomis, daughter of the moon Nokomis. Again, you start off with the stressed syllable and it is followed by an unstressed one. Dark behind it rose the forest, rose the black and gloomy pine trees, rose the firs with cones upon them, bright before it beat the water, beat the clear and sunny water, beat the shining big sea water. Our next feats would be the anapestic poetry. Now this has the two unstressed syllables first, followed by the stressed one. Now limericks are a good example where we usually see anapestic meter, and you'll notice I've put them into blue. So we have a limerick here by Edward Lear, and you'll notice we again have two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed one. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." So again, for anapestics, we look for two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed one. Built their nests in my beard, and a wren and a hen. You're putting the stress on this particular for the nouns, and you have unstressed syllables coming before. The dactylic poem, remember, is going to be opposite. Your stressed syllable comes first, followed by two unstressed syllables. So going back to English first, we have Alfred Lord Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade, where you'll notice you've got one stressed and two unstressed in his dactylic poem. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade. Charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. And then, of course, our last type would be the spondaic poem. Again, they have equally stressed or equally unstressed syllables. The two syllables should be equal. Because of the nature of the spondee, a serious poem cannot be solely spondaic. It'd be almost impossible, however, to construct a poem entirely of all stressed syllables. Therefore, the spondee usually occurs within a poem having another dominant rhythm scheme. So when we look at then combining different poetic feats, how many of these iambs do I want to put in? How many spondees do I want to put in? Is this supposed to be dactylic? How many do I want? Well, you can see that we have different words for how many feet per line. If you're going to have a very short poem where you just have one iamb, you would call that a monometer. It's a very short line. And so as we kind of go up, you can see the numbers kind of counting up from monometer, which equals 1, to dimeter, which is 2, trimeter, which is 3, tetrameter, which is 4, pentameter, which is 5, and hexameter, which is 6. Usually, poets have a tendency to use some of the longer lines. They've got words to use, so usually you'll see them in 4, 5s, and 6s, but you could certainly do the 1, 2, and 3. So then once we put all of this together, the types of poetic feet that we've been learning on the left-hand side, and the number of feet per line on the right-hand side, all of that together is going to equal the meter of your poem. What type of feet do you have? How many feet per line equals the meter? All right, well, let's go ahead and quiz ourselves on meters and feet. So if a poem had 1 foot per line and the foot was iambic, the one unstressed and one stressed, what type of poem would it be? Well, we've just told it was iambic, so we know the type. And there's 1 foot per line, so remember 1 equals mono. And it's a meter, so we're always going to have the word meter at the end. So your answer would be that you have iambic monometer. What if you have 2 feet? Well, you take the type that you have, which is iambic, 1 unstressed and 1 stressed, and you know the word meter comes at the end, and then you remember what is 2 feet. Well, that would be di. So it's iambic diameter. 3 feet per line would be iambic trimeter. And then, of course, fourth, you have the word tetra for 4. When you add in iambic at the beginning and meter at the end, you would then have, for 4 feet per line, iambic tetrameter. Arguably the most famous that you'll find in English verse is the next one. If it has 5 feet per line and it is iambic, you would call it iambic pentameter. Again, Shakespeare was one of the most famous that would use these particular types of lines. Now, let's try some of the other ones. If a poem had 3 feet per line and the foot was trochaic, what type of poem would it be? Now remember, trochaic is just like iambic, but it has one stressed at the beginning and the unstressed is at the end. So we're going to put trochaic and then we're going to put meter, and it looks like I actually put the wrong one there because it should be trimeter. Otherwise, it should say 4 feet per line. So why don't we go ahead then and experiment with different metric styles in your own poetry. Thanks a lot for stopping by at our page, guys. If you like this video, please like, please comment, tell me what else you'd like to learn. If you do like the channel, please don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for stopping by.